Hello and welcome back to The Path, the podcast from Lifestyle RX. I'm Dan, and joining me again is Dr. Byrne today. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great today.
Good. So this is episode 3. As people have been listening, they've been sending us in a lot of questions, so that's great. So we figured for this episode, we're going to spend all of today answering your questions. So we have a bunch of them lined up, and we're just going to go through them, and we'll see how many we get through, and we'll answer a bunch of these. So looking forward to it. So I guess we'll just jump right in. I'll read the questions and then we'll go from there. So, first question. Someone says, hello, I'm curious as to how long do we need to fast? Do we do it 7 days a week? And then do we keep doing that for months on end? Or I'm curious how the length of it works.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of mystery around fasting, it seems. So the first thing, in our Eat Better strategy, we talk about a 12-hour fast, 12-hour overnight fast. In some respects, we shouldn't, there's nothing special about that. That just should be every day you want about 12 hours to go by that you don't eat. And that just aligns with your physiology. Your body's not expecting food at nighttime. So 12 hours is pretty good. If it's 11 and a half, 12 and a half, it's kind of the same thing. We use in the program, we'll actually extend that fast up to about 16 hours. And the reason for that is just when you have insulin resistance, your insulin levels are often too high during the day to allow for fat burning. So insulin actually inhibits fat burning. At nighttime, your insulin levels start to drop off and they get low enough that it allows for some fat burning. And that's the whole idea of the metabolic switch. We flip the metabolic switch, we get some fat burning, and usually that'll happen in the 12-hour period. So that's why we like to do it every night so that we get that metabolic switch to fire. If we're trying to lose weight, though, we're burning fat at nighttime, get up in the morning, and as long as we're not generating, disproportionate hunger signal, we'll carry that fasting for a few more hours in that fat burning window. And we'll go up to 16 hours. We like to stop at 16 hours, though. And the reason for that is we eat for 3 reasons, right? We eat for energy, we eat for growth, and we eat for repair. The energy part is kind of covered because we've got this stored energy that we're trying to get rid of called fat. But growth and repair, we need to be sure that we're getting enough protein in, and we don't store protein in our bodies. So generally speaking, we kind of like to get the fast going, 12 hours kind of for everybody. And then we'll increase that up to 16 hours as a way to kind of lose a little bit more weight. The more consistent we can be, the better. But not every day is equal in your lives, right? So some days you're going to get up and it's like you're going to have a choice between breaking the fast at 12 hours or waiting till 21 hours just because you're not going to get an opportunity. So on those days, you're going to break the fast at 12 hours and just kind of accept that that's the way that day is. Over time, if you pick up more days that are over 12 hours, that's probably going to help. But you don't have to do the same thing every single day. So you kind of have to fit it into your life. As you kind of hit your weight target, you can kind of see, if you stabilize on your weight target, you feel good with fasting 14 or 16 hours, you can leave it there. You can go back to 12-hour fasts. And it's kind of up to you how you feel and what works with your life. A lot of people that do fasting in our programs often find that that's just something that they continue with, even once they hit their kind of optimal weight. They're not gaining or losing weight. They feel really good at it, and they'll just kind of stick with what's been working.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Next question then. So this one says, I just started the program. So they're referring to our Lifestyle RX 4+2 program, and I feel so overwhelmed. Where do I start?
Yeah, so this is the challenge, especially in the community, because there's so much information and so many people have so many questions. And the podcast is probably adding to that. If you just simply follow the program, we lay out one behavior per week. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed, just put the blinkers on, do the online component, show up to your group, focus on one behavior per week. Look at changing those things that are in context of that one behavior each week. And and that's really it, right?
Mhm.
And it's just a good reminder that you can't change everything all at once. And the program really is laid out really sequentially. And so if you just kind of follow that along and don't look or read anything else, it'll probably help settle the feeling of being overwhelmed. The one thing I do remind people of all the time is the way we learn is is interesting because before we learn about something, we sometimes don't even know we need to learn about it. So we're kind of unconscious and we're not competent, right? So that
Mhm.
unconscious incompetence. Then we become conscious of it, but we're not competent. And so that's quite distressing because we know that we should be doing some stuff, but we don't really know how to do it yet. Then we get through that and we become conscious and we actually become competent, but we are thinking a lot about these things, right? And then finally we get to the place where we're competent, but now we're unconscious about it.
Yeah.
And this last fall, my son was learning to drive, and it was really great because I just got to watch this. You know,
Yeah.
at first he had just read a book and he got in the car and there was no competence, right? And so he had to concentrate a lot and had to learn how to do things. Then he went through that phase where, boy, he was pretty competent, but super conscious. Couldn't have the radio on. We couldn't talk. He had to think about
Yeah.
every left-hand turn. And then he eventually gets his license. And now I'm sure he's driving around with his friends and the radio's blasting and he's,
You get to those points where you show up where you were driving, like, "Oh, how did I get here?"
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So just a reminder, that is the learning process here. So at the beginning, that feeling of overwhelm is actually really natural. If it's getting to the place where you're getting worried that you might kind of just stop, then just focus on the behaviors that are in the program each week.
Awesome. Okay, next question here. They say, my question is about protein. Once I got into my late 60s, they're now 72, my family doctor told me to cut back on protein. He or she said, at my age, I was no longer growing, so did not need as much protein. I get much of my protein through yogurt and cheese and other plant based products. I have meat from time to time. If my doctor was correct, how much protein should I have daily to support my diabetic diet?
Okay. So I hate to say this, but your doctor is categorically wrong here. Um, maybe just not up to the latest research. What we're seeing as people age, we have more trouble taking on protein and incorporating it into our muscles. So we develop something called anabolic resistance. And so the latest studies are saying that you probably need, as you're older, above 65, you probably need somewhere around 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, which if you multiply that out, it's a lot. In our and just for perspective, the RDA, kind of the recommended daily amount that that's been set was set at zero point 0.8, and that's kind of the minimal amount that you need in order to replace proteins that are being damaged.
Hmm.
So there's always a bit of protein turnover. So even though you're not growing, you're constantly repairing, right? So receptors are being turned over, hormones are being built, you know, enzymes are being built and turned over, and you're turning over muscle. So you do need this zero point 0.8 at a bare minimum. And then the challenge becomes that it's hard for you to absorb it. So you actually have to push the protein level up when you're 65 or
Hmm.
above. Now, the thing that gets everyone confused is, well, if I'm overweight, do I really, because, clearly if some of my weight is fat related, do I really need to multiply that amount? Because it could get to some pretty big
Yeah.
numbers. So what we've landed on for optimal for diabetes, and it covers for people who are over 65, is 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram. If you're heavier, go on the lower end of the range. If you're lighter, go on the higher end of the range. And then Jess Pernack, our lead dietitian, introduces common sense to this, which is start with where you're at and gradually increase the protein. Protein's hard to add. It's very satiating.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons we want to have protein in every meal is for that satiating effect. But start from where you're at, see kind of how close are you to the 1.2, kind of work your way there, and then maybe try to push a little bit beyond that. But and then there's one other factor as we age that becomes apparent, and this is actually, I mean, as we age in our 30s, this changes. So it goes way, way back. So when we're very young and we are growing, our body can incorporate virtually any protein that we eat gets incorporated into muscle. So we very easily can pick up protein from diet. As we get older, what has to happen is we have to clear a certain threshold. There's a certain amount of amino acids in the blood that's necessary to even trigger uptake into the muscle. And
Yeah.
then, just to make it really hard for us, there's a cap on that. And so for most
Mm.
people, it's about 30 to 50 grams. Got to at least 30. So if you're lighter or slighter, maybe it's 25. But 30 to 50 grams. If you eat more, that protein's not going to get in either, right? And so if you take your total amount of protein that you need per day, you're going to have to divide it into individual, like you're going to have to divide it into these kind of
Yeah.
portions, which ends up usually meaning that there's for most people, they're going to have to eat three meals or 2 meals plus a protein snack in order to kind of get enough protein in during the day. So yeah, hate to disagree with a family doctor, but this is one that you when you're 72 now, when you're 92, this person will really appreciate if they've loaded up on protein and maintained muscle mass.
Excellent. Okay. All right. The next one here. See if I can stumble my words a little bit less this time. So, as you increase your exercise levels and your blood sugar and A1C levels drop into more acceptable ranges, how do you change your eating habits or diets to stave off hunger and avoid low blood sugar numbers without breaking your fasting window? Or would you change your fasting times?
Okay, so a couple of things here. When your blood sugars improve, that obviously is kind of what we're trying to accomplish here. But more profoundly, we're trying to get rid of the insulin resistance. So when we do the one-on-one assessments, we'll actually kind of target at what weight do we think you will have got rid of the fat in the liver that's causing the insulin resistance, and that's the ultimate endpoint, is trying to get to the place where you've got rid of that insulin resistance. So blood sugars and A1C is one component of that. So the other piece is, this is lifestyle, it's not a diet, right? So we're not doing this temporarily. We're doing lifestyle changes that we can maintain really forever. And
Hmm.
so you shouldn't be hungry on this. If you're hungry, it's not working. Um, so one of the things that's really profound when people see it, usually kind of weeks 3 or 4, is that hunger and cravings disappear, and they realize, you realize that what you thought was hunger really wasn't hunger. It was actually craving on the basis of the insulin resistance. So you shouldn't be hungry. That's shouldn't be an issue. Low blood sugars as well. The only reason you'll get a low blood sugar that is anything to worry about is if you're taking insulin, or if you're on a sulfonylurea drug like glycoside or glyburide. Those drugs can push your blood sugars lower. And so generally speaking, we will identify those in the initial consultation and give you some specific guidance around decreasing or stopping those medications as you make progress. The other medications are not going to be an issue. So in terms of low blood sugar, so that part you shouldn't really have to worry about. Your fasting window, as we said, 12 hours is just normal. We probably shouldn't even call it fasting. It should just be kind of what you
Yeah.
normally do. And I think we touched base on why you would, if you're at weight target, then you can decrease back to that 12-hour fast is perfectly acceptable.
All right. Okay, so the next one here, it says in the 10 things to ditch from the Kitsch, which is I think it's in, is it week 2 where we go over that? Week 2, yep. It mentioned whole wheat bread, canola oil, and cereals such as all brand buds and even yogurt. So I guess we'll do this question in segments here. So first off, for the yogurt, does it include plain yogurt?
No, so what we're getting at there are the sweetened yogurt products, right? So there's a lot of yogurt that has just a lot. Well, there's a lot of yogurt that has stuff added to it above and beyond sugar, but so plain yogurt is perfectly fine, but the sweetened yogurt we want to get rid of.
All right, and the next section here is also in peanut butter, and they wonder, does this include natural peanut butter?
Yeah. So with peanut butter is a great food, but the only ingredient in peanut butter should be peanuts. So if you buy some peanut butter and it has a whole bunch of other things after the peanuts, then that's adulterated peanut butter, and you should back on the shelf and get one that just has peanuts. The challenge and why they put all that other stuff in is if you just make peanut butter from peanuts, the oil separates in the jar. And so when you get it, you have to kind of stir it around.
Right.
And in our household, that's the least favorite task. So when one peanut butter is finished, everyone's trying to get the last bit out so they don't have to be the guy that goes
Stirs the next one.
Stirs the next one. So yeah, peanut butter is a great food, but yeah, it should just have peanuts.
All right. And then what about the, I think they're all brand buds for fiber. What are the thoughts on those?
Yeah. So we make a big deal about cereals because pretty much every cereal's not very good. But they have kind of touched on one cereal that probably isn't bad, which are brand buds. And that can be a pretty reasonable cereal. The challenge, though, with cereal is what do you have the cereal with? You usually have it with milk. And remember, milk is sugar water, right? So the sugar in the milk is lactose. So lactose is a molecule of glucose and a molecule of galactose, which will become glucose. And so essentially you don't really want to be drinking, those calories. So
whole bowl of milk.
Yeah. So that's kind of another reason to get rid of it. The easy substitution is, steel cut oats, or, have your plain Greek yogurt, with some nuts or seeds, and some berries. That's a good substitute there.
All right. Perfect. Okay. So next one here. When you talk about reversal of diabetes, how is that different from remission? Or what is the distinction between, I guess, reversal and remission?
Yeah. So remission is kind of the destination. So it's defined by a number on the A1C. So the definition, or the accepted definition of remission, is a hemoglobin A1C of less than 6.5, and not being on medications. And then there's differences between how long you have to not be on medications for in order to qualify for quote unquote remission. I have huge problems with this definition. First of all, stopping somebody's metformin when their hemoglobin A1C is 6.5 doesn't really make sense. Second, it's kind of confusing things in that if we've understood what's happening with the individual, then, and we're talking about reversal and remission, then we're talking about reversing the insulin resistance. So let's keep going till we get rid of their insulin resistance and have dealt with the root cause. And so reversal really refers to the process. We say kind of for shorthand reversal of type 2 diabetes. Really, it's a reversal of the insulin resistance component that is predictable. And so in our practice, what we try to do help people do. So we're more like Sherpas. We don't actually do anything. We guide people.
Yeah.
But what we try to guide people towards is, let's find a lifestyle where your behaviors align with your physiology. You start to lose the weight and your blood sugars start to improve. Let's, we're not going to stop the lifestyle because it's a lifestyle, right? It's a forever thing. B, when you get to, an A1C of 6.5 or less, we're super happy for you. That's a great accomplishment. But there's no reason why you can't get that A1C below 6 or even, below 5.6. And so we just kind of keep going with it. And we will track the insulin resistance component. And that's the component where we're more likely to stop all meds when you get to that place. Mm-hmm. So it often means that on practical purposes, we are starting to discuss for taking you off meds kind of when your A1C gets below 6.5. But we're not going to get super aggressive with that until we see that the insulin resistance is completely gone. Now, the one caveat to all of this is I'm a huge believer that people are in control of their own health. And so you obviously are going to have an opinion about when you want to stop medications. Yeah. And if it's really important to you, you want to stop earlier, and you've got the lifestyle down, it really is only a matter of time with the lifestyle that you're going to see that continued healing in the body that will allow you to get off of the medication. So sometimes people want to stop early, and we will support that.
Okay. Okay, so next one here. When you fast for 12 plus hours, it seems that the morning sugar level doesn't change much and it is as high as before fasting. What could be the reason for this?
Yeah, so we touched on this, I think, in the first week,
Hmm.
and but it's a question that does keep coming up, and I think it's so important. So your blood sugars are really determined by there's two phases to it, right? So there's kind of the absorptive phase when you're absorbing food that you've just eaten. So those blood sugars are very much determined by what you ate and your body's kind of your pancreas's immediate ability to release insulin, and your muscle's ability to store that glucose, with insulin. When you're not eating, it's your liver that's producing sugar, right? So once everything's been absorbed and packed away in the cells, your liver has to click in and start to produce a little bit of glucose, to maintain that normal blood sugar. And Dan, what's the normal blood sugar equivalent to? How much glucose?
1 teaspoon. Oops,
One
one
teaspoon.
teaspoon.
So your liver is going to produce 1 teaspoon every 30 minutes at rest. And so kind of 2 teaspoons per hour. So what happens is overnight when you're fasting, essentially what's happening is your liver's producing the sugar, and it's your brain's using some, your body's using some, all is good. Around 5 in the morning, you release a little bit of cortisol, and that cortisol is kind of your get up and go signal. So, as we said, like I think in the first week, Dan, you're going to be getting up, so let's pump out a little bit more cortisol so that you have some extra fuel there when you start moving, and so that sends that signal to get the liver kind of producing a little bit more. And then as the liver kind of produces a bit more, blood sugars go up a bit. And what's supposed to happen is you get released just a little bit of insulin to kind of keep it within kind of the normal range. With type 2 diabetes, there's that fat in the liver that's causing the
Mm,
insulin resistance. And so it doesn't quite put the brake on adequately. And so the blood sugar goes up. And so that's what we see where people will have, a blood sugar that, they go to bed with a blood sugar of 6, they wake up with a blood sugar of 8, and they're like, wait a second, I didn't eat anything. Did
yeah,
somebody
yeah.
sneak some food in at night? But it's totally normal. And then because it's cortisol related, if you're stressed or if you're not sleeping, and you release more cortisol, the effect could be more dramatic. And so this fasting blood sugar improves over weeks to months, whereas your meal response improves literally meal to meal, right? So as you eat a better aligned meal, you'll see kind of less of a blood sugar excursion.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. The next question here. So this person would like an understanding of what is driving a change in their blood pressure. So they've had about a 20. I don't know what. How do you say the unit for blood pressure?
Uh, Milligram of mercury. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, drop in systolic and a 10 milligram mercury drop in
Did I say
diastolic
milligram? Millimeter of mercury.
millimeter. Okay, the normal one, 120 over 80. That those numbers. So they've had a 20 drop in systolic and about 10 drop in diastolic since getting their blood sugar more stable.
Yeah.
I've read that high insulin levels impact how constricted your blood vessels are. Is this true, or what other factors are playing into it?
Yeah. So this is a great question. Yeah. So one of the things that happens, we see with insulin resistance is blood pressure goes up, and so it's something that we see all the time, and it probably is one of the most common reasons for elevated blood pressure is actually insulin resistance. So the issue, as the patient who wrote this question implies, is those high levels of insulin. They're affecting the ability for the blood vessels to dilate. So it's a nitric oxide effect on the endothelial lining, epithelial lining. So endothelial lining. So anyways, the long and the short of it is high levels of insulin will lead to higher blood pressure. When your insulin levels drop because of the changes that you're making and decrease of insulin resistance, blood pressure drops. So it is one of the reasons why whenever we see somebody who's on blood pressure medication, we do kind of warn them at the beginning that as they make these changes, they might start to notice that their blood pressure starts to drop. And
Mm,
in if you're taking the blood pressure medication, it doesn't realize things have changed, and it continues to push for lower blood pressure. So if you're getting lightheaded or dizzy, that's probably a sign that your blood pressure is lowering. And anybody who's taking medications for blood pressure should have a blood pressure cuff at home. And so, what you want to do is check your blood pressure. If you're taking medication and you're starting to see blood pressures, under 110 and under 70, then yeah, you probably want to talk to your doctor about that. And usually they'll back off a little bit, see what happens. But again, kind of one of the gratifying things with this work is we deprescribe a lot of blood pressure medications as part of the whole process. So, so great question.
Excellent. Okay. So there's kind of two questions here that touch on the same topic. So one of them says, my question is, after eating, my sugar level went to 14. Is that normal, or should it stay below 10? And the other one is kind of, what is the normal range of blood sugar that we should be looking for using a CGM or testing our blood sugar like after we eat? What's that? How high should it go, or how low should it go if it's in the normal range?
Yeah. So really good question. And there's actually a lot to this question in terms of trying to understand it. So, when you're eating, how high your blood sugar goes is going to be in relationship to a few different factors. So the first factor, of course, is how much carb and how quickly is that carbohydrate being absorbed from what you just ate. So if you have that 32-ounce Coca-Cola where it's going to basically be absorbed directly and quickly, that's going to spike your sugar because it's going to be delivering a whole bunch of sugar into your bloodstream. If it's chickpeas that you just ate, those chickpeas are going to take 6 hours to get fully absorbed. So even though there's a lot of carb with them, it's going to take forever for it to come in, and it's probably not going to result in a huge increase in blood sugar. If you're eating something like brown rice, where there's a lot of carbohydrate and it gets absorbed relatively quickly, then it's going to be dependent on a few other factors. And so this carb load comes in. Remember, kind of when you're not eating and everything's been absorbed, it's your liver that's producing glucose, and it's going to produce a teaspoon every half an hour. And so if you need to turn that liver glucose production off, because if you're eating and all of a sudden there's carbohydrates starting to enter the blood from your food and your liver's still on, in 30 minutes, you're going to double your blood sugar, right? Because it's going to produce, right? So you could go from 5 to 10 just on the basis of your liver not being turned off. So what happens is when you first eat, there's an initial release or burst of insulin that's designed to turn the liver off, right? For people with diabetes, that first pass of insulin is one of the things that disappears. They don't do that very well.
Interesting.
And so a lot of the rise in the first 30 minutes is related to the fact that your liver is still producing glucose and is still pumping some in. And so, if you've had long-standing diabetes, then you might not have that first pass. If you've relatively kind of recent diagnosis, you might be a little bit better at that. So that's kind of the first part of it. And then your pancreas has to produce a proportionate amount of insulin to the amount of glucose that's coming in. And so that's kind of another factor here. So just, is your pancreas able to, if it can't do that first pass, is it able to, get enough insulin out? Usually by an hour, kind of these factors are all done, right? The liver gets turned off sometime, even in the worst case, it'll get turned off by an hour. Your pancreas is kind of cranked into full gear of producing as much insulin as it can possibly produce. So the next hour, kind of from hour 1 to hour 2 of absorption, it's all dependent on your muscles. And so here it's back to, muscles will normally absorb 80 to 90% of the glucose. And is there room at the end for the glucose coming in? So have you been exercising, or have you done nothing since the last time you ate, right? And so if you've been sedentary, there's no room at the end. And so that glucose then ends up going back to the liver, where it basically gets turned into fat, which is part of the problem that we're trying to get rid of. So so your muscles are kind of the other part. So what we see in this, when we look at these CGMs, there's just a wealth of information here. If you know what you ate, you can kind of figure out all these components, and you can kind of figure out what's working or not working. There's some tricks to it, right? If you eat, and one of the reasons we tell people that walking after eating a meal is so good is the movement of muscle will allow glucose to enter the muscle without insulin. So even if you can't produce a lot of insulin, but you can move the muscles, you'll lower your blood sugar pretty significantly. But back to the person's actual question, what's the range? So 14, yeah, definitely too high. And when we do a glucose challenge test, so this is where we give people 75 grams of glucose, and we check their blood sugar at 2 hours. If it's over 11 at 2 hours, that's diagnostic for diabetes.
Okay.
We want it normally should be under 7.8 by 2 hours, and really kind of anywhere between 7.8 and 11 is kind of in that pre-diabetic state. So the CGMs are calibrated for a range of 4 to 10, and it's great. I think it's time and range. There are people who are thinking that time and range on a CGM might be a better measure than hemoglobin A1C for kind of what your control is.
Yeah.
What I do in practice is we start with between 4 and 10. And then what we look for is essentially, if you're never spiking above 10, then let's change your range to 9. And then eventually we can change it to 8. And then that way, that you're just not, that the meals that you're eating are slow enough carbs that they don't overwhelm.
Causing a spike.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, and then I think we have time for one more here. So how can you tell if your metabolism has flicked the switch when you are fasting? Does the CGM tell you that?
No. So the CGM is not really going to tell you that. What's going to tell you that is that you're not hungry the next morning, right? And so what happens for people that struggle with fasting is they're not flipping the switch, and they're basically using their stored glycogen. And we only store about 2,000 calories of glycogen. So overnight, you can put a pretty good dent into that. And so your body doesn't want to run out of glycogen. If you run out of glycogen in your liver, that could be catastrophic. So as the glycogen stores go down, you start getting really hungry. And so what is if you're not getting hungry, it means that you're not tapping into that glycogen because you're flipping into fat burning and you're using fat for fuel.
Yeah.
And as you get better at that, and as your metabolic switch gets really good, you kind of lose hunger. It's a really interesting phenomena for people, and a lot of people will tell me that they, what they thought was hunger and what actual hunger are two different things.
Yeah.
And so anyways, you're going to know that you're flipping the metabolic switch just because fasting is easy.
Cool. Yeah, I guess that's you. I've also heard you say before, like if you are trying to fast and like extend it or something, and you're just absolutely starving, it's really not worth it. You haven't switched, right?
No, yeah, you're not switching into fat burning, which is why we're doing it. And then secondly, you're not burning that much fat. And if you go and eat 2,000 extra calories because you got so hungry, you're going to actually have not kind of created an energy deficit. You're going to be back in energy surplus. So I've said this, I think, on both of the first two episodes. It's so important to listen to your body. It's going to tell you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's all the time we have for questions today. That was great. So if you have any more questions, of course, leave them in the comments under this post on the community. There'll be a link in the description to get to the community page where you can leave those comments, and we'll answer a few of them on each podcast. And then some weeks we'll do just one with all questions like this. We can get through a bunch of them. So keep the questions coming. All right, so we will go on to our case study for this week. So we'll play the video of the patient case study for this week, and then we will come back and talk about it after. So play that now.
Dr. Brendan Byrne, Medical Director of Lifestyle RX here. Got another case study for you. This week, we're going to talk about age-related type 2 diabetes. So our case study is for RT, a 72-year-old man who was diagnosed at the age of 69.
He presented on glycoside metformin with a hemoglobin A1C of 7.9% and a BMI of 37.6. His goal was to lose weight and have more energy. So remember, in our model, what we see determining blood sugar control is this balance between the pancreas's ability to produce insulin and the resistance that insulin faces in the body. So pancreatic beta cell capacity versus insulin resistance is going to determine kind of your blood sugar control or your hemoglobin A1C. So for this patient, what we see is what we call moderate insulin resistance. It's under 2 times normal. Pancreatic beta function of 76.7, so essentially normal, and a hemoglobin A1C of 7.9, so poorly controlled diabetes, despite 2 medications. So as we've talked about in our model, insulin resistance is predominantly driven by fat in the liver, and we generally see, or it's generally accepted, that there's probably about 400 grams of fat in the liver that drives this process. And what we learned from the direct study is that it takes about a 15% weight loss to reverse the hepatic insulin resistance that's responsible. This is a pattern that we see quite commonly, and it's one of the subtypes, age-related. So moderate insulin resistance, accompanied by minimal pancreatic beta cell compensation. So the beta function is kind of normal, low normal, or just above normal, but not really very high. And what we generally see is that this presents in patients kind of after age 65. And it's very responsive to weight loss and exercise. So this patient began our program and learned the 4+2 strategy and went through the 12-week program with a core behavior every week. And really the goal here was to find a path of lifestyle behaviors that would help him reverse the insulin resistance and get control of that hemoglobin A1C. So the goal for RT was to achieve remission of type 2 diabetes. Let's look at the progress. So at the beginning of the 12 weeks, BMI, as we said, 37.6. At the end of 12 weeks, 32.4. So 13.9% weight loss. And in our model, that would say that's pretty close to weight target, and so much of the insulin resistance should be gone. So the initial hemoglobin A1C of 7.9 is now 5.7. So with that weight loss, the insulin resistance has improved, and with the removal of that insulin resistance, RT has enough insulin to have normal blood sugars. And if we look at this in terms of other behaviors, so this is kind of from our wellness quotient, we actually measure behaviors. So RT's initial nutrition score was 6. At the end of the program, it was 7.8. But exercise was 5, and at the end of the program, 8.1. And these are probably the 2 big drivers, but especially the exercise here. In this subtype of type 2 diabetes, we really see the role of exercise. So our conclusions are, with age-related type 2 diabetes, increased focus on exercise in addition to nutrition has a powerful effect, as we've seen here with this case study. And finally, RT's goals were achieved. He certainly lost weight, and he reported feeling much, much better.
Yeah, I really like this case study because it really demonstrates, again, another one of the subtypes of type 2 diabetes, and it drives home how important not just nutrition but also exercise is, and especially for some people. So it also shows just what's possible in 12 weeks. It's a pretty impressive change in 12
Yeah,
weeks.
definitely. Yeah, for sure. Okay, and then we'll wrap up with your thought of the week.
So the thought of the week actually goes back to our last question. If it feels really hard, something's not working. So the last question we were talking about was fasting. If you're getting really hungry when you're fasting, it's actually not working. So you need to back off a little bit and take it slow. Same thing with exercise. If it's really, really hard, you're just not fit enough to do that. So just back off a little bit, and you want to train, not strain.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So thank you so much for listening this week. It was great to have you here again. Once again, the usual reminders. If you are interested in signing up for the Lifestyle RX program and you're in one of the places where it's offered, which is currently BC, Alberta, Ontario, you can go to lifestylерx.io and register there. If you're anywhere else and listening to us, we're glad to have you. You can always join our community and go read through all the resources in there, ask questions, and participate that way. If you know anybody that you think would be benefit from this, feel free to share the podcast with them. It's a nice, easy way to get them in and get them learning about this topic. So we share the link, share wherever you're listening to someone that you know. And if you can leave a like, subscribe, review, whatever the system is where you're listening, we would really appreciate that. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.